Good morning, everybody. I am Wendy Nystrom, your host with Environmental Social Justice. Today's guest, we have the return of Tate Wimberley. Tate is the managing director of Madison Street Capital and an ESG expert. But today we have his friends Georgia Makunga. Georgia is from the country of Kenya in Africa, and he is the co-founder of Limachain and researching the intersection of technology and rural agriculture. But today we are actually going to focus on social justice within the country of Kenya, specifically with the recent developments happening there. So Georgia, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here. Please tell us who you are, what your background is, and what you'd like to talk about today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Wendy. So I'm Georgia Makunga. I live in Nairobi. I've been an entrepreneur for 2 years now, whereby we've been researching how technology can potentially benefit small-scale rural agriculture. And I've also been a part of the tech ecosystem in Nairobi, where I'm a member of the SafariDAO community, where we are fostering innovation for the youth. I'm also a student pursuing a physics degree in control systems at the Jomo Kenyatta University that is based in Nairobi. And I want to make a commentary on the current state of the country and how it's looking for the current youth of today to the global audience who may have been wondering why they've been hearing Kenyan protests on the headlines.
Yeah. So Tate, you have known Georgia for about over a year. You guys met on an online platform discussing sustainability and climate and the triple bottom line. Could you explain how you guys met and what drew you to bring Georgia more into your world and to work together?
Yeah, so that's correct. I did meet Georgia about a year ago with a group called the Triple Bottom Line. It's a group that meets out of Amsterdam virtually every Thursday or Friday. And I was immediately taken in by Georgia. He's got a great personality. He expresses himself well. He's what I see the future of the business community, wherever he chooses to kind of use his skills. So he took the initiative and reached out to me and said, hey, I'd love to be able to chat with you about what's going on in the business world. And really, even though I consider him somebody that I'm mentoring, I get just as much out of Georgia that hopefully he gets out of me. I mean, me being able to ask him what his household situation is, all those things, it's been a wonderful relationship so far with Georgia.
And when we all got together to discuss, what we were going to present today, we talked a lot about what's happening in Kenya, the political climate happening in Kenya, and what Georgia's currently experiencing. So I will let you guys kind of lead this discussion because I want to make sure Georgia's comfortable with the conversation, that we discuss only things that you guys want to discuss. So between Tate and Georgia, what's currently happening? What do people need to know about with respect to the economy, society, how people are being treated, the recent elections?
Yeah. So maybe I can start from there. Kenya is among what is considered the big four in Africa, which are the four leading countries in terms of the tech ecosystem and the economy, which are Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, and South Africa. So Kenya, according to recent history, hasn't had a good space in the limelight regarding its elections. And whenever we approach the elections, there is always an air of gloom around conversations regarding the elections. And this stems from the elections in 2007, where the disputed results between one contender, Raila Amolo Odinga, and the other, Mwai Kibaki, had disputed results, which led to violence, post-election violence, and bloodshed, which lasted for a few months, and it saw the death of many Kenyan citizens until peace was brokered by the African Union and Kofi Annan. So typically, even in the 2013 elections, Raila still vied again and lost, which he petitioned to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court upheld the victory. He vied again in 2017, appealed after losing, And the Supreme Court ordered a rerun of the elections. However, he chose to boycott those elections. And here now in 2022, Raila came back with a new coalition called the 𝐒𝐴ZIMIO coalition, running against President William Ruto. And he lost the elections again. But this time he claimed that the elections were stolen and that the servers of the Electoral Commission were hacked. He appealed the decision to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court dismissed it. And then just last month, he began holding protests every Monday. And however, these protests soon turned violent, and they involved protesters occupying Nairobi, the major streets, and the central business district. And this caused many businesses to shut down on Mondays. This got escalated to the point of people being injured and being taken to hospital. Even journalists had violence done against them. And this has caused some foreign parties to sort of urge the current government to be lenient on the protesters and to find a way to return the peace. And just yesterday, when Raila was preparing to hold what he calls the mother of all protests today, President William Ruto called a truce and asked him to call off the protests and that he would listen to the opposition's requirements. And just today morning, President Ruto has announced that he's championing a bipartisan approach to address the opposition's matters as a priority in parliament. Now, Raila has accepted this. However, he has threatened to recall the demos if no action and no effort is made, and the bipartisan approach yields no fruits. So that is where we are at with the protests that were happening.
So Tate, could you just, I know you've done some research on Rwanda and Guatemala with respect to peace and conflicts and violence and elections. Could you maybe provide some history to this?
Yeah, if I could also commend Georgia because of the way that he kind of presented the current situation is very diplomatic. It's apolitical. It's very, it's neither right or wrong nor left or right. So, and that's what inspires me about Georgia is he's got a very good sense of economic concepts as well as political concepts. So some of my studies, I've focused on the civil war in Guatemala with respect to peace studies, as well as the conflict in Rwanda. And from everything that I've learned with those two cases, one of the biggest risks for some of those at-risk communities that have upheaval is the inability to connect to the global dialogue and get those actors on a global level to facilitate exactly what Georgia is talking about: peace talks, diplomacy, a resistance to violent means. These are all things that that hopefully this interview can do, is highlight what the current situation is for the international community. One other thing I'll mention, and then I want to let Georgia manage this conversation. One of the things that we studied in our political studies was this kind of aspect that the U.S. has been seen as kind of a paternalistic state. Yeah. And this goes back to the Monroe Doctrine within the U.S., where typically other countries have felt like the U.S. is prescribing policy from without. And I am a firm believer in a concept known as endogeneity, which is essentially change has to come from within, from people like Georgia, his family, his friends, his connections, and stuff like that. Yeah. So Georgia, let me just ask you one question, and this it's maybe a little bit off script, but I would like to hear your approach to it. Do you think, given the recent election and kind of where the conversation has gone, that both the government sector and the business sector are maybe have too short term. They call it short termism, where the government promises things that they have to deliver, and the business community may be too interested in shareholder value. Are those things that, can you maybe provide like your interpretation of that?
So one of the things that the current administration promised to champion was bringing in more investment, leading to an improved economy and increasing jobs, which unemployment has been very rampant among the Kenyan youth, really leading to an increase in crime rate in urban areas. And so we have a high rate of high level of education, many graduates with no jobs, leading to them turning to crime. So the government's solution to this was to encourage investments and promote local manufacturing and businesses. And one way through which they supposedly were going to do that was cutting down on the processes, the legal processes required to open a business and the many licenses, for example, in Nairobi County, and merging them into just one license that would enable a company to start manufacturing and process its goods faster and provide employment. However, this has yet to be implemented. Now, the other thing was they promised to encourage foreign investment into the sector. Now, President Ruto has been making efforts towards this, and mostly in the energy sector. As recently as last week, he's been doing rounds in Europe, going to Germany, talking about how he's going to promote partnership to enable more renewable energy projects. And this can be applauded as one such positive decision in the right direction, because Kenya right now has 80% of its power coming from clean energy sources, whether it be wind, geothermal, and solar and hydropower. But however, we have our goal to attain 100% clean energy by 2030. And I think that is what President Ruto is currently trying to improve on. However, currently we had the issue with the increase in petroleum products and shortage of the US currency. And this really led to many businesses closing down and others not being able to import the goods that they need to run their daily businesses. And this was not a very favorable time for businesses within the country. However, one effort in the right direction has been Kenya brokering a deal with the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Aramco, to purchase petroleum products on 6-month credits. And this will reduce the demand on the US currency that is required for purchasing. And this will enable local businesses to continue purchasing goods, running their businesses as usual, and lowering the cost of acquiring the US dollar for their own uses.
One of the, oh, I'm sorry, Tate, go ahead.
I like the way Georgia framed that, because it's not about ending use of fossil fuels overnight. He's using a vocabulary which is the energy mix. So
Yes.
I think he's got a great view of what's going on.
And yeah, we talk about that frequently. George, you're spot on with that. We cannot just go renewable energy overnight. We have to have many diversification of resources. And that is spot on with what we're doing. But one of the things you mentioned was when we were talking was about the inflation that your country is experiencing right now. And costs of goods have severely increased, which is a burden onto many people. Could you, with respect to not just buying energy, but buying services, buying goods, buying food, how is that affecting people?
Yeah, the high cost of living was one of the things that triggered the protests that were ongoing in the country. We had things like maize flour, which forms the staple food of Kenya, called ugali, which is what many households take on a daily basis, had risen by more than 50%. And this hampered the ability of people to be able to get food. the cost of transporting produce from rural areas to urban markets where they are needed was high due to the shortage of petroleum fuel last year, and this led to shortage of vegetables in the local market, leading to an increase in prices, which caused people not to be able to afford it. Just late last year, we had reports of upwards of 4 million Kenyans going hungry because they could not afford food. We have people in the northern part of Kenya starving due to droughts, and their cattle were dying, such that they had to lower the prices because typically, for example, the communities in northern Kenya have herds of cattle, herds of sheep, camels, and goats, and cows even. However, these typically go for up to $100, which is 10,000 Kenyan shillings on the local market. However, they had to get that price down to even $4, and they still couldn't get people to buy them, just so they could afford to buy food to feed their children. We've had the high cost of living reflected all across the board, coupled with the lack of jobs and the high cost of services and goods. And this storm creates the worst living conditions possible for citizens of a country. And we had children not going to school because of lack of fees, people not being able to pay rent, you know, and this really did affect the economy badly. However, President Ruto and the current administration are using the tagline that they are going to improve the economy, and they are using that as a North Star metric for all the decisions they make within policy and administration.
There's a lot. I mean, we're one of the things that I'm just going over. We've discussed so many different topics in a relatively short time. You were going through quite a bit within your country, from the elections to inflations to economics to cost of goods, cost of energy, solar, petroleum. And now one of the things we talked about was the case of the Chinese development banks that have come in. I believe that's the foreign investors that are coming into Kenya.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Over the last terms and during the last administration's term, we saw an increase in Chinese debts within the country to finance what can be termed as the Chinese mega projects, including the standard gauge railway and the expressway that was completed recently.
Oh, wow. I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong. Is that a good thing or a bad thing to have infrastructure being built for you?
Well, one thing for the standard gauge railway, we'd say it is beneficial because it came at a needed time when we were seeing an increase in imports and we had no good transportation standard, and it was becoming costly to transport by road and by air. So the standard gauge railway improved the cost of transporting cargo by rail, and improved also tourism transportation and local access to the coast. However, things like the expressway are really, really costly projects which don't stand to benefit the majority. For example, the expressway transports links the airport road from the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport to areas like Westlands, which are areas where not many people who live below the poverty line live and work. So this really doesn't stand to benefit the majority of the people who need these improved roads. So we could say something like the expressway was made to benefit a few people, and this was what triggered many people, because it was quite a costly debt that would be paid over the next 2 or 3 generations to come, alongside other projects that are still going on. And these predatory terms that the Chinese government is giving aren't really beneficial to us, because the government is onboarding so much debt that they've almost hit their ceiling, and they want to raise the debt ceiling again to enable them to take on debt to finance the current financial year's budget. And so this is not sustainable in the long run if the country wants to improve its economy permanently, because we are going to keep falling back down into the debt trap, no matter what policies we come up with, what regulations we come up with, how much we improve the country's manufacturing capacity. If we cannot avoid these debts, then we are still going to be stuck in this hole.
That is true. Tate, did you wanted to add anything onto that?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, and I know this is maybe off script, but one of the things that many Americans point to is the work that Bono did around the turn of the millennium with forgiving a lot of that debt by the more developed countries who are the loan offers. Is that conversation still happening locally? Are people still talking about some of those really onerous debt covenants and restrictions being forgiven so that it can allow for economic prosperity and growth and development?
We haven't had much talk of debt forgiveness because as of last year, I think the IMF had classified Kenya as a lower middle income country. And I think it was either, I can just confirm, I think it was Zimbabwe that was classified as a low income country and had its debt restructured to enable the government to take on more to improve the economy. However, since Kenya is considered a lower middle income country, debt forgiveness was now out of the picture. And so right now we are seeing the government pursuing things like aggressive taxation to enable them to improve and increase their revenue to be able to finance and pay off the debts that we currently have. As of the last financial year, we had seen metrics such as for every 100 shillings collected as tax, 60 shillings of that went to paying off the debts that we had. And so this left little to finance the government's budget, the government's programs, and little to trickle down back to the county governments and the local governments. And so this debt problem is an issue that we need experts to get a handle on it to enable the government to come up with sustainable practices that might be able to see us through them.
Absolutely. I just want to tie all of these things back together because we only have a few minutes left. We started talking about elections and then someone, claiming the elections were stolen. We can draw some parallels to our own countries here. Protests becoming violent, to economics, to rampant inflation, to cost of living going up, to energy crisis, to climate change, to fossil fuels, foreign investors raising debt ceilings. Again, we can draw a lot of parallels here, to trying to push down those debt ceilings, but then rampant taxing. What's our solution? What are your solutions? Even in the US, we could probably learn a few things from what you guys are dealing with.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we can say we've done well as a country is the electrification and energy systems that we've put in place. For example, we have over 70% of the country that's electrified, and we have programs that are going into rural electrification. However, to attain our clean energy goals, we'll need more access to developer financing from international funds to enable them to access capital cheaply to build these projects and supply energy to those who need it, because currently we are seeing people felling a lot of fuel from firewood, and to enable the clean transition and reduce our emissions, we need the complete annihilation of such practices. Now, we also need public-private partnerships, and this would enable us to reach our targets in terms of projects and financing. And instead of relying on things like the Chinese debt, the public-private partnerships will enable us to promote businesses at the same time finance the projects that we need to finance, creating local employment instead of outsourcing it to outside firms. to come and build our infrastructure for us. We also need policy interventions. We need strong policies to come in terms of restructuring and improving our economy to enable the economic policies that we currently have to be improved such that we are able to come up with better ways to finance our debts without aggressively taxing businesses that are creating employment opportunities and manufacturing opportunities within the country without taxing them to the ground and forcing some of them to close down.
That's spot on. A lot of people with excessive taxes, I see it even with friends of mine who are starting up new businesses. A lot of them have had to close their doors simply because they couldn't keep their business running anymore. So that is a very valid point. Tate, did you have anything you wanted to include?
No, I would just say if this is an opportunity to get outside kind of neutral diplomacy actors informed of the situation, that's kind of my biggest hope, is to highlight not only Georgia because he's a bright future talent, but also the current situation and hopefully greater awareness by the public can lead to better solutions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point of what I do is bringing awareness to everybody of all the new inventors out there, all the people that are working hard to fix the world that we live in, to make things better. And Tate, I'm so grateful that you brought Georgia to my attention, because Georgia, the work you are doing is so important to let people know, not only in economics and finance and brilliant ideas that you have, but you're bringing it to people like me who don't have that background, that will want to understand, that want to help, that want to see how I can help you with the connections I have, or even the voice on this show, to bring attention to what you are experiencing. So for that, I'm very grateful. And I really wish that you guys keep doing what you're doing. Come back anytime to give us updates and discuss this more in depth as well. That's all I can ask for right now.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I think it is important to have my voice out there, because, as you've said, there are people who might be willing to help but don't know how to. And I think one of the examples that I've given is in terms of policy, we need policy experts. In terms of investment, we need foreign investment coming into the country to improve our manufacturing sector and increasing employment in the sector. We also have a burgeoning tech ecosystem. We have very good developers. We have great startups coming up. However, getting the funding they need to be able to launch these innovative products is one of the things that proves troublesome. And even according to Stats, Kenya is one of the leading in terms of funding. So we still need more funding and more programs to enable entrepreneurs to get a stage to voice their innovations and give them the vision they need to be accessed.
Absolutely. I mean, I always tell people, we have to keep talking. We have to keep, even uncomfortable conversations, we have to have those. As long as it's respectful. I mean, I don't tolerate yelling or screaming or anything like that, but as long as it's a respectful conversation, and we just have to keep bringing it up and bringing it up and bringing it up over and over again until people pay attention. And we do need that policy to happen. Change is slow. Policy is slower, but we just have to keep going. So, Georgia, I commend you and Tate for keeping this going, keeping this conversation alive.
Yeah, and if I could commend you, Wendy, and also Georgia, you've created a safe space. And really, it's very insightful from Georgia. I look forward to staying in an ongoing relationship with you, and I'm fortunate to have met you, Georgia.
I think we're all fortunate to know Georgia. I think we're seeing a very bright future. We're going to see Georgia's name in lights. So on that, guys, Georgia, thank you so much for your time today. Please keep doing what you're doing. It's very important work. And Tate, thank you so much for introducing us and inviting him on the show, because this is what we do. This is what we're about. So on that, guys, I'm Wendy Nystrom, your host with Environmental Social Justice. Special guests, we have Georgia and Tate today talking about trials and tribulations in Kenya. Please keep aware of it, keep informed, and reach out to Georgia if you want to help. Thank you guys so much. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.